Hello everybody, Rob B here with Rob D, and this is your market update, raw update from Rob and I that comes out every Friday, where we look at what's been happening in the market externally and internally and give you the insights, our insights at least anyway, and hopefully they are useful. But Rob, we know how this starts now. We look out for each other, we care, and we ask, how are you feeling?
Well, this morning I'm feeling all right. If you'd asked me last night, I was feeling less all right with the announcement that we'd be locked down for at least another 3 weeks. And I know from the gift that you sent me last night that you were feeling the same way. So that wasn't great. But now, having slept on it and with the sun shining, feeling all right. How about you?
Yeah, I was the same. Last night, not in a great place. Had a glass of red to ease the pain. And this morning, somehow, I don't know if it's the sun shining, but actually it's probably more to do with the fact I've processed things and processed all the information I've kind of collected over the last days and weeks. And I'm actually feeling really, really positive. And we can get into why, because it is a lot of things that have happened this week that have made me feel the most confident that I have for weeks. Because, of course, I may have sounded confident on the podcast previously with the outlook for the future. But I'm starting to see evidence this week and laying out exactly, okay, what we think might happen is starting to play out.
I think that's really interesting because something that I've spotted over, particularly the last week, lots of different data has come out, lots of projections and different surveys and things like that, with lots of very contradictory information. In particular, there's been data around how many tenants are in arrears. I've seen estimates from 5% to over 50%. So clearly there are issues with data collection depending on who you ask. And then there's also been a couple of things out about projecting the future of the economy, which again get you to quite different places depending on the assumptions you make. So looking at all that, all you can really do is be a bit confused. But we were talking before about some of what you've actually been seeing this week, which, while anecdotal, I think is probably more valuable than looking at these projections based on a whole load of assumptions.
Yeah, there's a few things been playing out that have given me a lot of hope. The first is that it's been very easy to speak to developers recently. And Rob, you asked me the question before we went live, which was, do you think that's because they're desperate or just because they've got more time? And I actually think it's because they've got more time. There are some that are desperate, and that absolutely that is the case. But a lot of developers are planning for the future, and the conversations that we're having with them are about sites that they either are about to acquire, have acquired, or are thinking down the road, right, we want to acquire that. Really positive conversations, and almost not even acknowledging where we are today, because there's just that assumption that we'll be through it, it'll be business as normal, we can actually price it like today. So they're not thinking about prices falling, they're thinking staying steady, and in some cases going up in a year or two. And that's just really reassuring. But then one of the developers I spoke to, they've got a site in the Northwest, and they were going to wait to put it out to finance companies for developer finance. But earlier this week, they thought, you know what, why don't we test the water? Let's just see what comes back. And they put the proposal over, and they got multiple finance offers. They were overwhelmed. They couldn't believe how many companies not only were willing to lend, but were pitching them on why they were the best lenders to work with. And we're right in the middle of things right now. We've just had the lockdown extended for another 3 weeks, but finance hasn't gone away. And this is a really important point, that if finance remains and doesn't disappear, then this is very, very different to '08.
Yeah, it's different from '08 in some negative ways as well, in that activity has dropped off so far and so sharply. But the availability of finance is so fundamental. It's such an important factor. And the defining feature of 2008 was that it just all went away, completely dried up. And so far, that's not what we're seeing at all. We've also seen this week a lot of mortgage products coming back onto the market. So a large proportion of mortgage products, particularly those at higher loan to values, got pulled a couple of weeks ago. And we said on the podcast at the time, don't worry, this doesn't mean that it's because they think that prices are going to crash. It's because they can't get valuations done at higher loan to values, and they're all trying to adjust to working from home, and they're all dealing with mortgage holiday applications. That seems to have been accurate, because now a couple of weeks later, TSB have brought a load of their products back. I think other lenders have as well, which shows that there is this desire to lend. And short term, all bets are off. The housing market is basically closed, and who knows when it's going to reopen, and who knows what's going to happen when it does. But when you get beyond that, if lenders were concerned about how things were looking, they wouldn't be bringing these products back at the same values. So the fact that they are suggests that they don't think there's going to be an enormous fall in prices. And the fact that they want to lend is a really positive sign for not just the property market, but the economy in general.
It is. And businesses and developers, it seems, are making decisions like it's going to be okay. And that's really important because it's sentiment. If people believe things are going to be all right in the economy, then they generally are, because they'll force it to be true. It's also, if everyone believes the economy's doomed, it probably will be. Sentiment is so important when it comes to the state of the economy. The amount of developers I'm aware of that are going back to site on Monday and getting on with developments, it's crazy, actually. And that's not just the developers, that's the subcontractors. I know electrical contractors that are all going back on Monday. It seems that because they've kind of settled, let's see what's happening, and also, importantly, before people get angry, have the permission to go back, because they are allowed to go on site. They are one of the industries that are allowed to go on site. They are. And that's the first signs of things getting back to normal on an economic level. And that belief that things are going to be all right and we just need to get back to business will be hugely important to the success of our economy as the weeks and months play out.
Yeah, the main reason why I was feeling a bit down last night when the next 3 weeks of lockdown was announced wasn't just personally being cooped up for another 3 weeks, but when you look at the tests that they put in place for ending lockdown, there are 5 of them, I think, it was a really high bar. Like, one of them was virtually impossible. It's like, there needs to be no risk of a second outbreak. Well, you can never say there's going to be no risk of a second outbreak. So you look at that and go, God, it's going to be like this for months yet. But as you've just said, the desire to get back to work is very much there. You've identified one part of the economy that you're familiar with, so there's going to be lots of others as well that we're not familiar with, finding ways of going back to work. Clearly, there are going to be some businesses, some big sectors that can't reopen, and there's not a lot they can do about it, and they could be in real trouble. But there are areas who are figuring out ways of staying open. The desire to do that is still there. And I think in a few weeks, a lot can change. So while it looks like it's another 3 weeks, then it looks like it's going to be more after that. It wouldn't surprise me if we did start seeing restrictions being lifted, because we've seen an enormous amount change over the last 3 weeks. So if you project another few weeks out, we'll probably see another big change again. Not everything going back to normal at all, but things being put into place, some restrictions being lifted, so gradually more parts of the economy can go back to normal.
Yeah, completely agree, Rob. We'll see, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if in 3 weeks' time we start to see the first softening of the restrictions. Nothing drastic, but I think everybody at that point will be ready for some sort of movement. Last week we touched on our thoughts about the economy in the bigger picture, and that we were reading up on different bits of information and collecting our thoughts. And I think it's worth sharing those now on a very, very high level, and we can deep dive into this on another podcast in the future. But at the moment, where I'm at from all the extensive reading I've done, collecting lots of intelligent people's thoughts and then throwing a few of mine in as well amongst them, and where I've got to is that I feel the most likely scenario of the economy moving forward is that we need to inflate our way out of this. And what I mean by that is that we have a lot of debt now, or we're about to have a lot of debt. To get out of this crisis from an economic point of view, we will need to pump, and we are pumping, lots of money into the system. Now, once that money's in the system, it will create inflation if it's allowed to. You can put things in place to try and suppress that, but actually the incentive is there to let inflation go. And the reason why is because we have so much debt. The way to bring down that debt is to stimulate your economy so that you make so much money that you can pay it down. But the size of the debt will be so big that there's actually a kind of sneaky way of getting rid of that debt is by inflation, and inflating your way out of that debt. So the real value of that debt disappears because you use inflation. And this is a tactic that's not new. This has been used through centuries, using inflation as a tool, as a mechanism to eliminate debt, sometimes deliberately and sometimes accidentally. If you look at what that does to property, you only have to look back to the 70s, and the fastest period property ever doubled was in the 70s, and prices in the UK, property prices in the UK, doubled in the space of 3 years. Now, that's hard to believe, isn't it? But it happened, and the reason it happened was because of inflation. So there's a lot of risks around inflation. It can go too high. It means interest rates can also go up and go up too fast, and you've got to really balance this out. And as you can see, there's a lot of ifs and buts, and there's nothing guaranteed here. But if they allow inflation to run, what you can be certain of is that asset prices will rise, which will include property prices, and debt will be devalued. So if you hold assets, like property, with debt, like a mortgage, you will do very well. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's not what we're getting into here. That's just what will happen. Now, of course, I can't say that's going to happen for certain. There are many, many, many outcomes that could take place, and that is just one of several that people are floating around. But of all of them, all of the reading I've done, that's the one I can relate to most because there's so much incentive to allow it to happen. One, you've got the stimulus going in anyway, so you're going to have to choose to stop it happening, and you can do that because we did that after 2008. The way we unwound QE meant that we didn't have huge amounts of inflation. But if you want to let it go because you've put that stimulus in, you can. And if you're incentivized to let it go because it'll devalue your debt, the country's debt, then the chances are you will. So the fact that it can happen and you've got the choice or the ability to allow it to happen means that there's a reasonable possibility that this is what could play out in the future, which will put us in to an asset boom. Not everyone will like this and not everyone will win from this, and a lot of people will be hurt by it. If you ask me to say what is most likely of the scenarios going forward, that's the one I'd be edging to. So it's not this will definitely happen. It's not a full-on prediction, but we did promise we'd share our thoughts.
Yeah, and I feel the same way in that you look at where debt to GDP is going to be, and it's all just projections at the moment, but it looks like it's going to be like back to where it was post 2008, and if not more. And so you look at, well, how do you get that back down again? Well, you can stimulate the economy, fine, you can do that, but you're going to stimulate the economy by that much? Doesn't seem likely. You can cut public spending. Well, we've already cut public spending, and I'm sure you can cut further, but we spent a decade cutting spending to try to sort it out after last time, so you can't do the same scale of cuts again, and even if you did, it would take another decade. You can tax more, but realistically, there is only so much you can tax, and the reality of it is there are lots of ways that you can tax, and there are lots of groups who, in theory, you could tax more, such as the multinationals. But in reality, because it's so hard to do, and there's so much pressure not to do certain things, tax increases tend to fall predominantly on the middle class. And you can ramp up taxes, but, as the Laffer curve shows us, you can only do that so far before receipts level off anyway. So you're never going to be able to increase taxes high enough to get your debt to GDP back down again. So that does only leave you with that one option that I can think of, which is inflating your way out of it. There's also the deflation argument. So there is a school of thought that we're going to go into a deflationary period. And to be honest, I just don't have enough knowledge of that. So I'm going to read up about that to try to challenge my own views. But I just point that out to say that there are lots of smart people who have different views, but based on what we know right now, and not a prediction because it's too early to make predictions and that only makes you look silly anyway, that does seem like the most likely course to me.
And ending on something a little bit silly, last week we talked about someone's comments on iTunes and how they weren't happy with something we'd done, and you can go back and listen to last week's episode if you want to listen to that. But this week, Rob, I woke to a funny YouTube comment this morning. The YouTube's a funny place for comments anyway. But we've released a video this week on YouTube, and it's called Let's Talk About Property Expenses. And one of the first comments that have come in simply says, "You are not social distancing!" 3 exclamation mark.
Is this person under the impression that like, whenever they turn on the TV, all those actors quickly run into place and start acting out for them in real time?
It possibly appears so. So, just to reassure anyone who may think that our videos on YouTube are live and haven't been pre-recorded a date and often many months earlier, we can reassure you that any YouTube videos that are going out at the moment were done months ago, and we just drip feed them out every couple of weeks. Rob and I are currently not producing any YouTube videos together. But thank you for your concern, and the social distancing police getting involved on that one. But do go and check the video out, because it's very useful. It talks about property expenses and should you be paying them or should you not. And if you'd like to leave us a nice YouTube comment there, you can do too. We'll be back next Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob, and then we'll be back with the podcast on Thursday. And yeah, we'll do another market update. There's still loads going on. There's loads of insights we can give you. We can tell you what's happening behind the scenes with developers, let you know what conversations we're having, and also give you our views on the market. So we'll keep doing that as long as it's needed and wanted. So until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.